But when the camp was finally evicted in January of this year, the local community realised that basically it was down to them. So they really got active. And they call themselves the geriactivists. The geriactivists. And obviously, we've educated them on how to deal with the police, which is politely. But there's only one question you ever need to ask a police officer. Only one question. It's all you need to remember. Only one question. And that is, am I under arrest? And if the answer is no, say thank you. I don't need to talk to you anymore.
Yeah.
And when you've got 82-year-old people from the local community, the police do not want to arrest. So I got a piece of video footage which, where I'm going to show it now. But I got a piece of video footage where got the line of the geriactivists in front of the gate. Humberside police are up there reading them the Riot Act. This is the 5-stage warning. It's called the 5-stage process. You've got five warnings before you're under arrest. Anyway, this sergeant starts reading part 1, and then immediately goes on to part 2. So I'm filming. I said, you can't do that. There's got to be a gap of some reasonable time between reading part 1 and part 2. I said, it's not a 5-stage warning to be read out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So anyway, he waited about 10 seconds. I said, no. I said, no, that's not a reasonable gap. Anyway, came back a few minutes later, and I said, that's still not a reasonable gap. And I said, this is all on video. And I said, anyway, you're not going to arrest these people, are you? And he just went, oh, fuck it. And he waited for a senior officer to come. The senior officer came up there and said to one of the geriactivists, so how long do you plan on standing here? And this was like about, 11 o'clock or something like that. And they said, well, because they were blocking the truck from coming out. They said, well, lunchtime? And the police officer went, okay. So, you got this line of a dozen or so people, average age probably 75, just standing there, and then come 1 o'clock, they just got in their cars. But all of this contributed to Rathlin Energy on August the 12th this year saying, you know what, fuck it, we're just not going to go to Cruel Hill. Because they knew that the local community were not going to give them a free ride.
So it is actually the police that move you on after the camp has been evicted then? Like the bailiffs and everybody go, it's just the police that have to deal with it?
Yeah, basically once if a camp is removed and then people are there, then the police effectively become the corporate enforcement officers working on behalf of the corporations to provide access. But the police also know, and the police have told us this, if there is enough people from the local community, they are not going to enforce it. It comes down to numbers. Humberside police made it very, very clear to us in East Yorkshire that whilst they had the numerical superiority, they were not going to facilitate peaceful protest.
How did that go for them?
Well, on the day that we did have numerical, or the weekend that we had numerical superiority, I mean, this guy here, I have never seen a guy knocked to the ground so many times, bounce straight back up, and there was no way they were going to arrest anybody. But what they were shown was that basically the only way they were ever going to be able to facilitate Rathlin coming onto the site was when they had numerical superiority. And of course, a lot of the police forces are under pressure in terms of numbers, and so that, they're also starting to get concerned about the likely impact of this industry when it does start trying to roll into town.
So it's numbers, really? Yeah,
it's numbers, and especially local community.
Does it take the wolf at the door to get the community out? Because we live, Upton, Tarvin, these are very conservative areas. And, I talk to people all the time. I've learned so much in the last 2-3 months. I would naturally be sceptical and against this anyway. I'm that swivel-eyed lefty in the pub that they all think is nuts. And I'm shocked at the things I learn every time I learn more about it. And people, I can see people thinking, you believe any old bullshit you're told, mate? Because it's almost beyond belief, isn't it, the whole industry? Yeah. How do we engage them? I admire the people who live in the camp and give so much for this cause. I admire them enormously. But I also know the people who live in the housing estates of Upton, who live in, who want their company car and all the stuff they're entitled to. They're more afraid of someone with dreadlocks. They think they're worse than a policeman. They do, don't they? It doesn't matter if you're there for them and you're saving them. They don't see that. So how do we, I talk to people about their house prices, the things that they care about, and they still don't give a shit.
Well, they will do when the house price is seriously under threat.
Oh, it would affect an economical effect, yeah.
But it takes that.
Sorry.
There's a chap in, we have a camp in Duddleston, which is in North Shropshire, but we've moved from one field to another, and there's a chap that has a house that is, I think, the second nearest property to the actual well site, and he has already lost 50k. Off the value of the, you know, basically on his own thing and said, listen, you're going to have to take at least 50k.
I mean, the point is well made, because when I was first starting to try and raise awareness, which was in the first half of 2013, and I did a 63-day tour of the country, trying to stimulate people's curiosity on this. And, you know, and I would show them the physical evidence of the water contamination, the soil contamination, the negative health impact. You know, Aaron Jenkins being told he has to sleep in a gas mask because of the level of gas created by the flares at night. And people go, oh, it's terrible. It's really, really terrible. Yeah, it's terrible. And then I would show them the impact on property prices in these areas. And they go, oh my God, what? What? And initially that used to really frustrate me, but now I thought, you know, well, whatever pushes their buttons. The lady who lives in a beautiful, beautiful cottage next to the Rossiter well site in the Fylde Peninsula, she had this cottage valued at, I think it was £750,000. And then during the application process for the well site to be in the field adjacent to her property, she asked for the property to be valued, and the estate agent basically came out and said, it's got no value. She said, well, give me a value. She said, well, you're going to be lucky if you get a couple 100,000 for it. And that was published. That was in the Sunday Times. Yeah. In fact, the Sunday Times, I think, ran a full-page spread on her situation. It doesn't matter where this industry turns up. You know, sometimes you've got a short-term increase in property prices. I mean, particularly in the US, where, you know, communities are so few and far between. So when the gas industry rolls into town, rental prices go up, or you know, people want to come into the area because they think it's going to be long-term. So prices go up short-term. What's happening now is that bubble is well and truly burst. And in fact, unfortunately, what you've got in Australia, in Chinchilla, and in Pennsylvania, in North Dakota, is you've got businesses going bankrupt because they thought that this was going to be long-term. So they borrowed money to expand their bars, their motels, their restaurants.
Strip clubs,
yeah, strip clubs, exactly, you know. And guess what? You know, they've still got the debt, obviously, from the borrowing for the expansion, but there's no business anymore. So, that, you know, the smart ones are those who just milk it for the short term and then get the fuck out before the bubbles burst.
This is almost a historical precedent, though. It's kind of like the Alaskan gold rush, isn't it?
Yeah.
Kind of like, you know, they came in for short-term profit with the gold in Alaska. And all
That's exactly how they describe it in the US and in Australia.
And it's just leaving into the desert, ghost towns.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Cover, yeah.
Exactly. So, obviously, the reason that we are having the meeting tonight is because, as of Friday, the Upton camp is under threat of eviction. Because IGAS have managed to get a court order to evict the camp. Now, there's no guarantee that it will happen on Friday. And call it a hunch, but I think that some people in the camp are going to make it as difficult as possible for the camp to be removed. But really, once the camp is removed, and it may not be removed very far, but once the camp is removed, then, like in East Yorkshire, the onus then falls very much on the local community. I mean, I'm sure there will still be people from the camps in the area, but when the trucks start rolling, then the nature of the game is to literally make it as difficult as possible, because there are two ways in which you shut this industry down. One is you remove the investor will. In other words, you make it very clear to the investors that basically this is a black hole. And I've had multiple abuse because, a year ago I was telling IGAS investors, get out. When the stock was £1.20, £1.30, I'm like, get out, guys, sell, because the stock is going to tank. And of course, I get all the abuse from the the market's on that, but here it is today, 19 pence or whatever, 19.5 pence.
Whoa.
You know, with Third Energy in North Yorkshire, it's owned by Barclays. And you know, I think Barclays investment houses are looking very closely at what happens with the well at Kirkby Misperton. If that doesn't go well, they'll be looking to divest. Rathlin Energy is owned by Connell in Canada. Connell has announced that it's selling up all of its assets in Canada because it's going to focus its interests in the UK. Now that is industry rhetoric for we're losing our ass in Canada, so we're going to try and recover something of that in the UK. I think that Rathlin, like iGas, is a prime candidate to be taken over by the likes of INEOS. But so investor will is the first thing to remove, and the second thing is political will. And unfortunately, I think at the moment it seems that we're going to have a lot more chance of getting investors, whether they be the market, i.e. in the case of iGas, or the private investors like Whitaker or Ratcliffe or Barclays, to just say, you know, that's a black hole, we need to be out of this industry.
How strong is Quadrilla?
Quadrilla is owned primarily by Centrica and AJ Lucas. AJ Lucas is an Australian company, and that's in the toilet. I mean, their stock price is, I mean, hanging on in there, it's a few cents. I think it's about 25 cents, which is about 12.5 pence or something. And Centrica. And if it wasn't for Centrica, Quadrilla would be in a world of hurt.
Wouldn't it be good in Germany?
Sorry?
How's France and Germany?
France has banned.
They managed to ban it.
Yeah, well,
France just actually, the people just went along and just literally uplifted the cables that took a direct activism and they just went, we're not having it, end of. Literally got involved.
Well, and it was Sarkozy, when he was president, he put a ban on fracking in France, and then when Francois Hollande became president, he continued the ban, and then a company, a Texan company called Studback, actually took the French government to court, claiming that by instituting the ban, the French government had denied them the opportunity to get their lawful revenue. Right. Well, that went to court. It went to the highest court in France, the Conseil Constitutionnel, and the courts ruled that basically the government ruling was right, it should stay in place, and consequently unconventional gas exploitation is banned in France. The problem, and this is the first time I've mentioned this tonight, is TTIP, the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, which is the other problem coming down the road, which is the attempt by the corporations to establish a raft of legislation which rises above national and EU legislation and would enable the corporations to take the government to court for loss of revenue. Now, that's another battle. It's a big battle, it's a massive battle, but you know, let's keep this manageable for them. Thank you. It's my dad. Dad, can I call you back?
If these shares are going so low, wouldn't, you know, they like jump then, aren't they? Wouldn't it be good if we all bought some when they're like pence, so that we could stop them doing things?
I think you'd have to buy a hell of a lot. Yeah. I mean, it's a nice idea. I mean, certainly you could buy a few and go to their AGM.
And cause trouble.
Absolutely. Yeah, at least you get through the door. Unfortunately, it wouldn't matter how many I owned, they wouldn't let me through the door.
Well, we complain about that.
Okay, well, it is 20 to 10, and I said we'd be wrapped by about 9:30. The camp is still there, and will hopefully be there for a while. And then, if you do have any more questions, then please go down to the camp. And I can tell you, these guys with dreadlocks, they're not really that scary. Yeah, they're lovely guys, and you will get a very, very warm welcome. And you will also find that they are incredibly knowledgeable. These are not just random protesters. These are people that have committed themselves to fighting this insidious industry in this country. They are extremely well informed, so you not only get a cup of tea, you'll also get their insights from their research. And then hopefully, obviously, we spread this through the community. And then I have some of the DVDs of the documentary at the back. And obviously we made this a public meeting. There have been some costs, and if you do feel you can make a donation towards the cost of the evening, then there's a couple of buckets by the door. And there's a whole bunch of information as well, I think, which Olive has on the table there. And you please spread the word.
We also have
That's it. Let's see, with 107 News, it's wrapping up now. The
Which guy's from the States? Which part of the States are you from?
Texas.
From?
Texas.
Texas. Whereabouts in Texas?
North Texas.
Oh, in the Barnett Shale.
quite a lot of
Dallas, Denton.
oh, the selfie
Yeah.
stick.
So, would you disagree with anything I've said tonight?
No.
Anything that you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, everything he pretty much touched on the horrors of fracking, and I guess I can just say from experience living in Denton, Texas, where we had over 280 wells in our community. It created literally just a nightmare, and this kind of resistance that they're doing out at Frack Free Upton is baseline, like what should be going on. I mean, if you can learn anything from what has happened in Texas or Pennsylvania or anywhere else, I mean, people's lives are on the line, and it's important to remember that.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, Denton on the Barnett Shale, and interestingly, Dallas Fort Worth, which of course is an oil city. I mean, much of Dallas's wealth was based on the hydrocarbons industry. Well, Dallas Fort Worth has effectively made unconventional gas exploitation illegal within the city limits. Now, they're not dumb enough to just put an outright ban on it because they would upset a lot of people, in the oil and gas industry. So what they did was they introduced legislation that prevented any well from being drilled or fracked within 1,500 metres of a residential property or a public building. And because of that, it effectively made the area inside the city limits off limits. And all around the US, I mean, there are communities that are trying to challenge the industry. The sad thing is, and this is what we have to be very careful about in this country, the sad thing is that what has been determined in the US is that the corporation takes precedent over the private citizen.
And that legislation has been overturned. It's not still in effect. You can drill within that limit that you said of houses, schools, hospitals.
Yeah, earlier this year in Texas, there was a bill put forward basically by the industry called HB 40, which in the language it says anything that's deemed commercially reasonable. This is after we got our ban in Denton. Anything that's not deemed anything that's deemed commercially reasonable takes precedence over any other law or legislation.
And over the private citizen.
And over the private citizen.
Yeah. So, well, thanks very much for coming over here, and thanks for obviously supporting the camp at Upton. I mean, to be honest, if it wasn't for the experience in the US and the experience in Queensland, our job would be a lot more difficult.
yeah, indeed.
I mean, obviously, it's very sad what has happened, right across the US and in Queensland. But on the other hand, if it hadn't, then we would be really behind the 8 ball, I think. So thanks very much. Anyway, thank you very much for sharing the evening with me. Thank you.
What's the macro mode?
We have to ask the question, would you rather know or not know?
It's always good to know.
Yeah, you absolutely need to know.
Right.
Thanks, guys.
So that brings us to the end of the coverage on 107 News of the anti-fracking meeting that's taken place off a street, Crook Street, in the centre of Chester. Thanks very much to Kim for providing the extra power because I hadn't charged my camera up properly. So we were able to film for more of the evening, and now it's gone off focus anyway. But there you go, nicely off focus anyway. That's it. What's going to happen in a couple of days is the whole camp is they may be coming there to see if they can evict, and we're going to see if there's enough people in the community to stop the camp being evicted, the anti-fracking camp at the edge of Upton. So there we go.